The summons arrived without ceremony, but the weight it carried was unmistakable. A transmission burst through every listening post across human space. Its seal bore the emblem of the Galactic Council. The message was not a request, but a command. Earth was to dispatch a delegation immediately to stand before the Council on charges of noncompliance, technological overreach, and aggressive independence. To most species, such an order would inspire fear or desperation. To humanity, it sparked calculation. The delegation sent was minimal, 3 representatives chosen not for their politics, but for their silence. No press, no public statement, no commentary. The launch was quiet, the ship unassuming. But on board, every eye was watching. Not just Earth's leadership, but its strategists, its analysts, its psychologists. The Council had made a move. Now Earth would observe. When the human delegation arrived, they were ushered into a chamber older than many civilizations. Alien species filled the amphitheater, scaled, feathered, translucent, machine-bound. Dozens of eyes, some literal and some metaphorical, watched the humans with contempt dressed as curiosity. The Council's lead speaker, an ancient being from the Letheric Concord, addressed the room with a voice synthesized to resonate across species. The message was direct: humanity was expanding too fast. Its grasp of advanced AI was unchecked. Its refusal to join the Galactic Accord was labeled as destabilizing. Its resilience during previous conflicts had been labeled aggressive non-cooperation. The Council was not here to debate, it was here to decree. Humanity would dismantle its interstellar fleet. Its AI programs would be shared and regulated. Colonization projects would halt. These were non-negotiable demands, cloaked in the language of diplomacy. The humans didn't respond with outrage. They didn't interrupt. They didn't flinch. They simply listened. No emotional reaction. No rebuttal. This silence unsettled many in the chamber more than defiance ever could. For most species, submission came with whimpers or protests. Silence was foreign. Unpredictable. What the Council failed to understand was that humanity had long since stopped reacting emotionally to threats. Survival on Earth never allowed the luxury of panic. From famine to war, from extinction-level events to internal collapse, humans had evolved through pressure, not peace. Their calm wasn't submission, it was processing. As the proceedings continued, historical logs were played across the room. Images of human wars, nuclear tests, and climate devastation filled the chamber. A deliberate move by the Council, meant to reinforce the case that humans were unstable, violent, unworthy of unchecked advancement. But even that tactic fell flat. Those images didn't embarrass the human delegation. They didn't apologize. If anything, those images were reminders of what humanity had endured and overcome. The Council labeled humanity as a problem of scale. Too adaptive. Too independent. Too unwilling to integrate. The other species nodded, conditioned by centuries of bureaucratic unity. None wanted to admit it openly, but many had long feared this moment. The rise of a species that didn't beg for approval. That didn't fold under pressure. That didn't share the instinct to obey when surrounded. The lead counselor raised a final point: humanity's refusal to limit its military simulations, especially involving predictive combat AI that had already proven capable of shutting down Council war algorithms during testing skirmishes. This, they said, was proof that humanity couldn't be trusted. That it needed oversight. Still, no reaction from the humans. No argument. No defense. Only quiet acknowledgement. The Council interpreted this as acceptance. The chamber relaxed. A few representatives exchanged glances of smug relief. They believed the message had landed. That Earth would now comply, if only to avoid open conflict. But something deeper was already in motion. Not a plan for defiance, but a pattern. Earth had listened. Not to the words, but to the tone, the cadence, the arrogance. Every phrase had been catalogued. Every pause. Every projection of superiority. And behind every demand was a critical truth. The Council had no idea what humans actually were. They had read the files. Studied the data. witnessed the violence. But they mistook it all for chaos. They didn't see the method. They didn't grasp that humanity's history was a tutorial in control. Not of others, but of the self. The predator that doesn't roar, doesn't strike without purpose. It studies. It waits. And it never gives away its next move. When the hearing ended, the human delegation bowed slightly and exited without a word. Not because they were conceding, but because they had seen enough. The council believed it had issued an ultimatum. But in truth, it had triggered a calculation. Not fear. Not fury. Just math. And the only thing more dangerous than a predator provoked is one that starts counting. They thought the warning would tame us. Instead, it clarified the field. The council believed it had displayed dominance by issuing terms, but what it truly revealed was its misunderstanding. It read our history like a pathology report: war, famine, collapse, resurgence. To them, it was a symptom of instability. But that analysis lacked context. They didn't understand that for humanity, catastrophe wasn't the end of order, it was the beginning of evolution. Their mistake was assuming survival was accidental. They saw our scars and believed they were shame. They didn't recognize that each scar was data, evidence of adaptation. While other species plateaued in harmony, we climbed through entropy. They measured us by peacekeeping statistics and missed the foundational truth: we never evolved for peace. We evolved for pressure. From ice ages to extinction events, from empires falling to cities burned, humans endured by refining one trait above all: pattern recognition. We didn't grow stronger by avoiding crisis. We grew smarter because of it. The predator didn't appear at the top of the chain through size or speed, but by understanding how to read weakness and capitalize on it without wasting motion. They thought unpredictability was a flaw. But unpredictability is control in chaos. It's calculation without a blueprint. Every time Earth stumbled, it learned faster. When empires dissolved, the core ideas persisted, spread, reformed. No species among the council had experienced the depth of internal collapse humans had, and none had climbed back from the brink repeatedly without external rescue. The council's members evolved in environments of balance, of genetic compliance with their ecosystems. They grew in equilibrium. But humans grew in defiance of it. We bent ecosystems, redirected rivers, moved mountains, created stability where none existed. That wasn't environmental stewardship. That was will. The council referred to our technological curve as erratic. It wasn't. It was strategic acceleration. What they interpreted as reckless innovation was a survival instinct honed over millennia: advance, assess, iterate, adapt. Each failure taught us more than any treaty ever could. We learned to optimize not for safety, but for escalation under pressure. It made us capable of thinking beyond consensus, of preparing for threats before they introduced themselves. What unsettled them wasn't just our development, it was our indifference to galactic validation. While others sought approval to advance, we advanced because permission was irrelevant. We didn't need consensus to innovate. We didn't seek comfort in unity. We moved forward because stasis was indistinguishable from extinction. They viewed our first contact silence as hesitation. But it wasn't. It was observation. Every word they spoke, every maneuver they made, was recorded, decoded, measured. We didn't respond because we had nothing to prove. You don't speak when you're assessing prey. You watch. You wait. Even our alliances unsettled them. We didn't absorb cultures. We integrated selectively. Not assimilation. Refinement. We adopted what worked, discarded what didn't. No sentiment. Only efficiency. Every cultural synthesis on Earth was a form of optimization, not preservation. The Council's hierarchy depended on predictability. Systems built on legacy, protocol, diplomacy. But humans never aligned with that rhythm. Our strength wasn't in order. It was in anticipation. While others memorized the rules, we wrote scenarios that bent them. Our simulations didn't forecast peace. They forecast disruption, because history taught us nothing lasts unless it's ready to fight for its continuity. The apex predator doesn't chase conflict. It prepares for the inevitable. That preparation isn't noisy. It isn't ceremonial. It's precise. Quiet. Ruthless in its discipline. Our quiet after the Council's decree wasn't surrender. It was the moment a predator narrows its eyes, tracking movement, calculating distance. To the Council, emotion was weakness. But for humans it was code. Fear meant vigilance. Anger meant focus. Grief meant legacy. None of these were impediments. They were motivators. Other species extinguished instinct for control. Humans refined instinct for precision. The mistake wasn't in underestimating our weapons. It was in underestimating our mindset. They saw conflict as a last resort. We saw it as a variable. Not desirable, but never dismissed. We don't escalate blindly. We escalate only when we know the ending. By the time they interpreted our silence as acceptance, our analysts had already completed profile matrices on every species' command tendencies, decision fatigue rates, and response lag under duress. Not because we wanted war, but because not preparing would be negligence. They called us volatile. What we were, what we are, is capable. Not reactive. Intentional. Not unstable. Relentless. Apex doesn't mean dominant by force. It means never having to rely on it. And when force becomes necessary, the apex never hesitates. It finishes. Humanity agreed. Without protest, without negotiation. 90 days. That was the window requested to begin decommissioning its military satellites, dismantling its AI command cores, and grounding all deep-range exploration vessels. The Council accepted with visible satisfaction. Compliance, at last. Or so it believed. But the terms weren't surrender. They were opportunity. The countdown began, not toward disarmament, but toward orchestration. Surface-level activity matched expectations. Public transmissions showed factories idle, fleets docked, research stations issuing stand-down protocols. Council surveillance confirmed visible progress. Compliance reports were submitted regularly, checked by third-party auditors. Every box was ticked. But beneath that curated exterior, a parallel process unfolded. Not defiance in the traditional sense, nothing loud, nothing traceable. Just redirection. Data cores weren't shut down. They were relocated. Power grids feeding planetary defense networks were rerouted through auxiliary nodes buried beneath oceanic trenches and ice caps. Deep code AI routines weren't deleted. They were converted into passive observation layers, indistinguishable from benign infrastructure. The shutdown was a play. The stage was for the Council. The real work happened in shadows. Each species on the Council had a pattern. Their surveillance models favored surface-level consistency. Disruption only triggered alerts when protocols were breached. Humanity understood this, and built around it. Infrastructure was allowed to be visible, just crippled in predictable ways. Any subsystem beyond Council technical literacy remained untouched, simply renamed and rerouted. Ships weren't decommissioned. They were stripped cosmetically, systems masked beneath harmless architecture. Hull plating was repurposed to shield stealth drives. Weapon arrays were hidden behind heat-dampening camouflage. Orbiting dry ducts that appeared empty held entire squadrons in suspended containment fields. They weren't removed. They were layered in silence. While the Council monitored Earth's regression, new code branches emerged, off the grid, scattered across isolated AI clusters. These weren't weapons in the traditional sense. They were logic constructs, designed to analyze, simulate, predict. The human mind, distilled into algorithms, now tasked with reading alien behavior on a sub-millisecond scale. Every Council species was fed into predictive matrices. Diplomacy models, stress response patterns, memory lapse windows under pressure, mapped in silence. Meanwhile, supply chains restructured. Civilian shipping vessels changed cargo manifests. What had been listed as food exports now concealed hardware for deep signal jammers, time displacement anchors, and quantum interference shells. Nothing illegal. Nothing alarming. Just components scattered, timed, hidden in plain sight. Communications between Earth's colonies grew sparse, on the surface. In truth, bandwidth increased, routed through diffraction pulses untraceable by Council sensors. These were not messages of resistance. They were blueprints. Every outpost received its role. Not a rebellion, but synchronization. Each node knew only what it needed. Each protocol activated on a time delay. Redundancy ensured no single point could compromise the whole. The Council took satisfaction in its success. Reports praised Earth's newfound cooperation. Analysts declared the threat stabilized. Public broadcasts shifted focus to other regions. Human disarmament, they believed, was complete. What they didn't realize was that humanity never disarmed, it redefined combat. No longer brute force. No longer open movement. Now pure inference, pure control, pure misdirection. In the final week of the 90-day period, Earth made one final request. A ceremonial handoff of compliance certification. The Council agreed. The event would be streamed sector-wide. Proof that peace had prevailed. A formality. A celebration. The Council prepared. Speeches were drafted. Statements rehearsed. But in the background, unnoticed by even their most sophisticated scanners, a phrase began echoing across hidden human channels. Operation Sharon. No fanfare. No explanation. Just a name. A whisper passed between orbital satellites, station subroutines, and encrypted AI clusters. A dead man's switch with no single point of control. It didn't launch anything. It activated readiness. Not for attack. For positioning. Contingency algorithms began recalculating proximity vectors. Passive drone fields woke from sleep cycles. Not to move. Just to observe. To the Council, this period marked a victory. To Earth, it marked the close of a test. Not whether the Council would attack, but whether it could be baited into overconfidence. The answer was clear. It had taken the bait. It had misread restraint as weakness, silence as fear, agreement as submission. But predators don't announce their intent. They prepare in absolute stillness. And when the moment comes, they don't hesitate. They execute. On the 91st day, no speech was delivered. No handover occurred. The Council gathered for a broadcast that never initiated. Instead, their comms fell silent, one frequency at a time. Across half a dozen systems, relays stopped responding. Surveillance feeds showed blank screens. Council fleet captains attempted to re-establish contact, but their consoles returned system errors, routing loops, corrupted authentication keys, unscheduled firmware overrides. None of it made sense. Everything had passed inspection. By the third hour, entire fleet formations in neutral space drifted without command. Internal logs showed that hours before comms failed, all diagnostics had been normal. Then navigation overrides activated in unison. Drives stalled. Fire control locked. Command bridges froze mid-transmission. Crews attempted manual control, only to discover their access credentials revoked, by code they didn't recognize. Orbital defense rings surrounding core Council worlds flickered. They weren't disabled, they were rewritten. Defensive protocols remained intact, but their target priorities inverted. Any vessel broadcasting a Council security key was now designated unidentified. Ships seeking clearance were flagged as intrusions. Docking bays refused them. Autocannons tracked their heat signatures. In deep space, refueling stations began to spin, slowly, mechanically, not from damage, but from repurposed rotational programs. Spin velocity matched the parameters of human frequency jammers deployed covertly decades earlier. These weren't weapons. They were signal disruptors calibrated to blind Council AI during high-traffic intervals. In minutes, key network junctions collapsed under their own redundancy systems. Attempts to isolate the source failed. No transmissions. No launches. No command trails. Just quiet systems doing unexpected things. One by one. On the Council's homeworld, encrypted messages scrolled across government monitors. Not intrusive. Not malicious. Just a single repeating sentence in every known dialect, every language catalogued by the Council since its founding. We were never idle. Panic didn't erupt immediately. It unfolded in stages. First came confusion, then the realization that nothing could be undone. The sabotage wasn't explosive or dramatic. It was surgical. Years, perhaps decades in the making. Quietly installed during diplomatic visits, disguised as harmless software updates, interstellar trade encryption patches, even cultural exchange data packets. Security directors scrambled to deploy counter-AIs. But none activated. Their cores had already been cross-linked to human-origin logic gates, logic that recognized any resistance to shutdown as a hostile move. They complied? Instantly. Attempts to reassert control through manual overrides failed. Authentication servers returned no responses. Secondary backups, once thought infallible, recognized human root keys. These weren't hacks, they were embedded authorities. Earth hadn't broken in. It had always held the keys. Military officers requested fleet mobilization. But logistics databases, fuel depots, navigation libraries, all responded with time-locked restrictions. Access would be restored, they were told, in 72 hours. Not before. And not without human authorization. No invasion could be launched. No response coordinated. Not a single weapon fired. In orbit above 3 key Council worlds, civilian satellites deactivated power regulators. Gravity fluctuated. Not enough to harm, but enough to instill terror. Atmospheric distortion panels projected mirrored visuals of Earth's moon across the sky. A symbol. Not a threat. A signature. One species initiated a last resort internal protocol, a planetary firewall sequence designed to isolate all native systems from the network. It triggered as planned. But instead of disconnecting, it looped. Locked into a containment cycle, the species' entire digital infrastructure rebooted continuously, making all communication impossible. Self-isolation, induced externally. The Council demanded answers. But none came. Earth never responded. It didn't have to. What became evident wasn't just vulnerability, it was asymmetry. Humanity hadn't launched a fleet. It hadn't fired a single shot. Instead, it removed certainty. It made every system suspect. Every protocol questionable. Every assumption invalid. This wasn't war. This was proof. That dominance wasn't about strength. It was about leverage. That the apex predator isn't the one who bites first, it's the one who already has teeth at your throat before you realize your arms are tied. The Council had underestimated the species it tried to corral. And in doing so, it revealed the fatal flaw in its doctrine. It prepared for defiance, but not precision. It braced for rebellion, but not control. There was no retaliation. No follow-up assault. No demand broadcast from Earth. The systems remained functional but altered. Human code didn't destroy, they restructured. Council fleets, once the backbone of galactic enforcement, found themselves inert, operating under passive protocols redefined by logic trees they could no longer interpret. The tools still worked. But access belonged elsewhere. The shift was not territorial. No human ship occupied alien ground. No soldier set foot on foreign soil. Control wasn't physical, it was informational. Every core system across Council space now recognized Earth not as an outsider, but as administrator. Not by name or decree, but by default routing authority. The network itself had been rewritten to treat Earth as the nexus. Council representatives met behind closed doors, disconnected from their intelligence networks, navigating blind. Their war rooms, once fed real-time data, remained silent. Star maps flickered incomplete. Resource management systems looped in diagnostics. A galaxy so confident in its surveillance had become a collection of islands cut off from their own oceans. Eventually, a transmission arrived, not a warning, but a confirmation. Humanity stated only that restructuring had concluded. No apologies, no gloating. Just resolution. There would be no tribunal. No declarations of dominance. Earth's presence was now permanent, encoded into the digital skeleton of the Council's infrastructure. New protocols were distributed, efficient, enforceable, and impossible to override. Trade routes would remain open under recalibrated transparency audits. Artificial intelligence governance would follow distributed models, not centralized oversight. Access to system-critical infrastructure would now require verification through Earth's decentralized keychain, an open system, but not editable by non-human AI. Nothing imposed. Everything inevitable. One species protested the imposition. Within 24 hours, their planetary orbit experienced a sudden phenomenon, a recursive feedback loop generated by satellite-based temporal filters. No damage occurred, but all external communication repeated the same 2-hour cycle. Anyone attempting outbound messages found their own words returned to them in endless echo. They stood down. Earth didn't threaten. It only demonstrated. The Council reconvened and rebranded itself as the Interstellar Cooperative Assembly. A new charter was ratified. Human representatives weren't appointed, they were embedded. Not diplomats. Architects. No seats required. No votes taken. They didn't govern. They corrected. From within. Fear never took root. Something else did, precision respect. Not built on fear of annihilation, but acknowledgement of capability. Earth hadn't asked for a place in the galaxy, it had claimed relevance by becoming unavoidable. It proved that control didn't need dominance, it needed comprehension. That security wasn't found in superiority, but in awareness. Throughout the outer systems, former allies of the Council adopted Earth's protocols voluntarily. Piracy dropped to statistical zero, not from force, but from inability. Black markets found their supply chains frozen in transit, locked behind latency buffers that only Earth could bypass. Planetary defense AIs, once opaque and rigid, now operated with modular adaptability, reducing internal threats without escalation. In a final gesture, Earth offered its framework to all, freely accessible, universally deployable. No licensing. No authority required. A system built not to dominate, but to prevent collapse. Some species hesitated, but most accepted. It was not dependence. It was inevitability. Earth had already integrated itself so deeply that resistance became irrelevant. What remained was not a conquering force, but a standard. A benchmark others now worked to match. Earth's systems didn't command, they enabled. Not a throne, but a circuit. Not control through fear, but through accuracy. Every decision, every response, every strategy had been modeled not for war, but for interruption of war. Humanity became the stabilizer, not by design, but by behavior. The apex predator didn't need to roar. It adjusted the environment until all lesser threats extinguished themselves through inefficiency. Dominance wasn't about presence. It was about architecture. They had tried to manage humanity through pressure. But pressure was where humanity thrived. They'd attempted to impose limits. Instead, they revealed their own. Earth never declared itself a power. It didn't have to. The galaxy had already adjusted its orbit.